Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Before we begin the show tonight, please allow me to say a few words about what we are all concerned about, the Russian armed forces invasion of Ukraine. Many of us gathered here tonight have the privilege of living in the so-called Western world. The Western world is a community of nations that is wealthy, but not in an ordinary sense. Our community is wealthy in values. The two Western values that guarantee all others are summed up in two words: liberal democracy. What does liberal democracy stand for? Liberal is defined by the American Declaration of Independence as, quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Democracy is defined accordingly as the, quote, "governments instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed to secure those aforementioned unalienable rights." Or, as President Abraham Lincoln declared during the Gettysburg Address, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. In other words, liberal democracy crowns and enthrones a république, the people as king. For all Westerners, come to think of it, being a king today is a really demanding side job. Our schedules are already jam-packed, and we seem to have become so comfortable in the flow of our daily routines that responding to attacks on our kingdom, i.e. our liberal democracy, is left up to the politicians who represent us. Why might it be so hard for us as kings to speak up against those attacks? Well, for one, we can't openly condemn the attackers because they disrespect our values. Isn't that freedom of speech? And we don't want to burn any bridges. We all do business with the attackers and even hope to get an invitation to their Independence Day beach house party this summer. Then again, we are also modest kings and happily acknowledge that our values aren't all that different by saying, quote, "You think our Western community is so innocent? But most of all, we probably don't stir even when our kingdom is at the stake, because we all are quietly scared we will lose the comfortable lifestyle we currently enjoy." Unfortunately for us, it's the opportunity that makes a thief. Just one generation ago, our predecessors secured the promise of our prosperous liberal democracy by sacrifices they made on battlefields, foreign and domestic, in academia and at lunch counters. One of my neighbors, another Western king, recently told me she wished she could ask her father, a World War II veteran, how he would respond to the Russian armed forces invasion of Ukraine. During the weeks and months ahead of us, shall the memory of the women and men who gave up their comfort to vigil over our Western community be our constant companions. And with that, let's begin tonight. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are so glad to welcome you as part of our community tonight. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and distributed live stream. By entering this virtual meeting room, you give your consent to be recorded and distributed by Vienna Live with Simeon Morrow and other third parties. If you prefer to not be recorded, please turn off your camera and microphone and or go to the Facebook Live video feed, the link to which I have now placed in the chat room. For a better experience, please turn off your microphone and set your video to gallery view. This show thrives on participant contributions, and all participants are encouraged to actively participate in this webinar by asking questions and making comments. To do so, please either write in the chat room, raise your hand, or turn on your microphone to say hi, and I will be delighted to include your perspective in the conversation. Tonight, our featured guest is Dr. Amy Likar, a flutist, director of training for body mapping, education, and flute faculty at the St. Mary's College of California. Also joining us tonight is Dr. Lino Rivera, professor of music at St. Mary's College of California. Amy, welcome.
Thank you, Simeon. Thank you for having me, and thank you for all of you that are attending today.
So Amy, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work as a flutist?
So I feel like I get to live in the best of both worlds, or best of all worlds. I get to perform on the flute and make music with people that I love. I get to teach flute. And then as an Alexander Technique and body mapping teacher, I get to coach musicians on how they can become more freely expressive, be more comfortable while they practice and learn their craft. And so for me, it's this how you combine the understanding of music with the understanding of the body and movement, and how you combine them to create compelling performances. And it's a lot of fun, and it helps me become a better musician, and hopefully helps everybody that I work with become a better musician.
So before we get into body mapping, tell us a little bit about your career. I understand that you're from Ohio. Tell us about your
Yes.
becoming a professional flutist in Ohio, and then all of your adventures up to, I guess now you're in Mexico at the moment.
Right. So I grew up in a community that had really incredible public school programs. My high school still has really strong programs. And so as a young player, I started piano when I was 5 and flute when I was 10, and decided to go to college for music education and thought I would become a middle school band director. And then I spent a year abroad studying in France. And while I was in France, I got to play Daphnis and Chloe with a side-by-side with the professional orchestra there. And the flute players in the professional orchestra thought we students were doing a good enough job on Daphnis and Chloe that they took the set off and just let us students play Daphnis and Chloe for 4 performances. And it was amazing. It was such an amazing experience playing that epic work with choir and, orchestra, and to do it repeatedly. So it wasn't only the rehearsals, but it was 4 performances of it, which was like, wow, okay, it gets better each time and we improve. And so when I came back, I then started studying with a Cleveland Orchestra member, Martha Ahrens. I added a performance degree onto my music education degree. I still did all the student teaching and the studying of what I considered really important, Dalcroze eurythmics, and the study of movement in the body and rhythm. And then I went to Swaziland, Southern Africa, and taught English in the African bush where my college boyfriend was a Peace Corps volunteer. It's now called Eswatini. And that was an adventure, to say the least. And it was when we were pony trekking in Lesotho, and I almost fell off the horse and off a cliff. I was like, I'm going to become a professional flutist because I can't die playing the flute. I could, but the chances are slim. I'm more likely to fall off a cliff pony trekking in Lesotho than die. Because at that point in time, I had experienced a lot of performance anxiety, and always was quite a perfectionist and had experienced some, jaw issues and some tendonitis issues and so on and so forth. But at that moment, pony trekking in Swaziland, which is now called Eswatini, I was like, I want to be a flutist and I'm going to work to do this. So I came back to the US, entered a master's degree program at Ohio State where I was offered a teaching assistantship, ended up getting a job teaching at Ashland University, stayed on at Ohio State for my doctorate, started doing well in some orchestral auditions, won some regional orchestral auditions. And then we moved to California, and I was introduced to the Alexander Technique. Well, no, that's not entirely true. I was introduced to the Alexander technique at Ohio State. That's also where I was introduced to body mapping. And both body mapping and Alexander technique have sort of become, well, no, they are the foundation of everything I do now.
Okay, so let's watch another video. This is of Martin Rokeach's piccolo concerto. Let's take a look at this. Wow. Wow. So Amy, so that sounds pretty adventurous too. You're getting some applause. Tell us why did you decide to, not go full in with the flute and go into this Alexander technique? A lot of us don't know what that is, and also body mapping, and pursue these things that really sound so much different than flute.
Well, I would say I have gone all in on pursuing flute and piccolo. And I pursued Alexander technique and body mapping. I alluded to this before. When I was an undergrad, I had a lot of performance anxiety. I'm a flute player. We have perfectionistic tendencies, and we sometimes have unrealistic expectations of ourselves, and we tend to work really hard, but we don't tend to work very smart. At least that was my experience. And so as a flutist, I had a lot of jaw tension, was very much a jaw clencher. As a pianist, I had a lot of tendonitis issues in my forearms. And so my flute professor at Ohio State suggested I take an Alexander technique class there. And that was taught by William Conable. And then I did some workshops that also included his ex-wife, Barbara Conable. And I ended up studying with Barbara Conable, and both of them teach something as part of their Alexander technique teaching called body mapping, which is understanding your structure, your function, and your size, and how your bones work to support your muscles, and how movement can become easier. And so for me, it's become this lifelong pursuit on how you can shape the movements that you use to create incredibly compelling musical performances. So I actually feel like going all in on being a musician supports my use of body mapping and Alexander technique, and my use of body mapping and Alexander technique really supports me as a musician. Now, it does mean that I end up splitting my time and teaching a lot, and also performing, and it becomes a juggle, but I enjoy every moment of it. I enjoy working with students and helping them figure out how they can realize their musicianship more freely and easily. through, all the things that we're taught in music school, historical context and theoretical construct and the importance of rhythm. Like rhythm is king, and rhythm is king for both understanding musical structure using meter and rhythm, but also helping to free your body. Most often people go into what I would say is that fight, flight, freeze response when they don't know what they're doing musically or rhythmically. And so helping people understand that, it's basically become my life's work. And I am really, really enjoying all of the people that I get to work with, from high school students to adult amateurs to college students to a lot of professionals, quite honestly. So it's very rewarding for me.
Amy, just before we watch another video of you performing, just so we know, is this Alexander technique, body mapping, is that starting to catch on with other musicians? Because like you said, it's actually part of your quote unquote artistic research, learning how to really do better, perform better the flute. I can't tell you that I've met a violinist, for example, who does this, is equally interested in this. It seems like they either have it or they don't have it, that they get hurt themselves or they don't.
Well, I would say most of the major conservatories in Europe and the United States have Alexander technique teachers and or body mapping and or Feldenkrais practitioners. There's a huge movement towards musicians' wellness and teaching musicians how to practice, take care of themselves, sleep, think about how health promotion helps their music making. And I would say, I know I've had the privilege of working at the Guildhall School of Music in London, where they have a reflective conservatory program, where they have body mapping teachers, they have Alexander technique teachers, they have Feldenkrais practitioners, but they also have, I do believe, physical therapists and psychotherapists available for students to work with. I know that the New England Conservatory has a program, Juilliard School has a program. My dear colleague and friend, James Brody at the University of Colorado at Boulder, has an amazing musicians wellness program there, which I've had the privilege of teaching on for the past decade. And it's doing a lot of great work, because not only do the performance majors get to experience what musicians wellness can do for their performance, it's also teaching the music education majors how they can integrate these ideas and these methods and these tips into what they're teaching the little ones. And learning how language matters and the language that you use with students matter, and just how to create a pedagogy that's not only mentally friendly, but physically friendly and musically friendly, so that we have, future generations of music lovers and musicians.
And it must help a lot that you are so established as a flute player, as opposed to those who aren't such experienced performers who then are teaching Alexander technique.
Well, that's my own bias. I feel like it's important to me to practice what I'm advocating. And so I learn a tremendous amount myself by performing and putting myself, under that, let's just call it what it is, pressure, and how to use that pressure in a healthy way. So the clip of the concerto that you played was a piece that Martin Rokeach wrote for me, that I premiered with the Oakland Symphony. And the Oakland Symphony plays in the Paramount Theater and usually has an audience of about 1,700 people. Now, remember when I said I suffered from performance anxiety? So anyways, a month before I was playing the concerto, I actually took a set off because it conflicted with an opera that I was playing, but actually volunteered to solicit money from the patrons that night. And so, because it was about a month before I was playing the concerto, and it had been a long time since I had done a project like that, yes, I was given a whole section where I had to walk down each row and ask all these people for money. That causes more anxiety for me than playing a concerto, asking people for money. But what I learned from meeting the people in the audience was that they're there to have a good time. People go to a concert because they want to hear a piece of music and they want to be moved. They're not counting, oh, this note was 20 cents sharp and this note was 15 cents flat, and oh, did you miss an accidental there? And oh, that phrasing, like, ugh. Most people go to a concert because they want to have a compelling, moving experience. And so, yes, showing up and soliciting money from people taught me that, oh, these people aren't going to be keeping track. My job is to be as musically moving as possible and to invite the audience in on my journey to express this music. And I knew from the collaboration with Martin that he had a very clear musical idea of what he wanted this concerto to say. And it was my job to make that happen. And so I ended up discovering that playing a concerto for 1,700 people was really fun and really enjoyable, and making music and performing is about inviting people on your journey. And so then it becomes all about the practice process and how good you can make your practice process so that you can free yourself up to do that.
Inspiring. Let's take a look at a video of the Alcyon Ensemble. This is Amy performing with Rena Urso and Miles Grabner. Fantastic. So, Amy, I understand that you have a presentation for us. And before we get to that presentation, though, I'd like to bring in Professor Lino Rivera of St. Mary's College of California, and then Dr. Jerry Davis also has a question.
Hello, Amy. It's so good to see you here.
So good to see you, Lino. I was actually going to say, I need to give a shout out to St. Mary's and a thank you to Lino for helping Rena, Miles, and I secure that space at St. Mary's to record in. So.
Absolutely. Now, my question is, we all deal with performance anxiety. I mean, it's just a part of a performance career. How does the Alexander technique and that body mapping change your perspective and cope with this, I would say, the monkey on your back, always present at the performance. How does that help you? How does that, change your perspective of performing?
So you actually just asked the perfect lead-in question to what I was going to do with everyone. So first of all, the Alexander technique has 3 core principles that I think of. And the first core one is what I would call the concept of inclusive awareness. So being aware of what you're aware of internally, while being aware of what you're aware of externally. And the second key concept of the technique is this idea that Alexander called inhibition or stopping. And so for me, if I'm going down a negative mental chatter minefield, I say stop, number one, but I accept that I'm there. I'm like, okay, I noticed that I'm going there. Okay, I'm going to come back to my whole self, and you can all do this with me. Just ask yourself how you are in this moment, what you notice, and just be very accepting of how you feel. And then for myself personally, I like to then take in all of my senses. So my sense of movement and how movement is at my joints. My tactile sense, so how my clothing feels on my body, how my shoes feel on my body, if I'm holding my arms or if I've got my hands in my pocket, what I'm seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, just becoming omnisensorial and including myself and my body. And then I become aware of space, the space above me, the space behind me, the space around me. And then cueing in on something in my environment that sparks joy. And right now it's my fuzzy slippers that I'm wearing. So this is a threshold exercise, an awareness exercise that I repeat all the time. And when I'm performing, hopefully I've done the work, that I understand the musical structure of the piece. I've done the work to practice it. I've properly prepared my, mentally, physically, musically to perform. And then I take the awareness of space and invite the people to join me. And I also like to use the term, rather than thinking of it as performance anxiety, to think of it as performance energy. And that I'm excited about playing, and that I'm very self-accepting that it may not be perfect, but that my job is to continually renew my relationship with the space. So, any thoughts on that?
Dr. Davis, I think you had something you were going to say.
Thank you, Amy. It's really excellent. I'm retired. I happen to like your skeleton behind you, by the way.
That's Rex. We're going to use him in a moment.
Okay. But could you explain just a little bit, what do you mean by body mapping?
So all of us have a representation in our brain of our structure, our function, and our size. And sometimes what we think of in our brain matches the physical anatomical reality of our bodies, and sometimes it doesn't. And so what I've learned through studying body mapping is that our mental representation will always take over. So one of the things that I usually have people map to start is a whole spine. So all the way from the end of your tailbone or your coccyx, all the way up to where your skull meets the top of your spine, and making sure that you're mapping the front of your spine as the part of your spine that distributes weight throughout your whole body and distributes effort and is one of the primary support structures of your body. And then the part of the spine that we actually feel when we touch our backs, the support structure of the spine is like a good finger length in from what we can feel. So every time I teach a little bit of body mapping, I'll have people put a finger up under their earlobe or in the hole of their ear, or think above and behind their uvula, the little thing hanging down in the back of your mouth. And roughly that is the top of your spine. And then thinking all the way down to your tailbone coccyx as the bottom of your spine. And if you actually get up and take a walk around your space, more often than not, whoop, there goes my AirPod. More often than not, people find that their spine is actually taking up a longer space in their body than they may have thought. Any thoughts on that?
Very good. Thank you very much. Oh, yeah. Well, the anatomy is perfect. I know the anatomy. I did inside out. And I did a lot of surgery on the spine and on the inside of the head. So that's behind me now. And I enjoy music, and I know Sim, and that's why I come to these meetings. Unfortunately, I missed last week. I got to speak to Sim about how I can get that back up. And I think you play extremely well, extremely well. I'm going to ask my daughter, Michelle, who lives in Colorado at Denver. Her little daughter is playing the flute now. And I'm going to have her get onto this program so she can hear what it really sounds like. I never seen a flute like the partner in the last clip. It sounded like a bass clip. Does that have a special?
Yeah, so that one, yeah, there in that video, I was playing the alto flute.
Yes, I never
Yes.
seen the bass. Very
The
interesting.
bass is even bigger.
Yeah,
The bass flute is even bigger.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to continue listening. Thank
All
you.
right.
Dr. Davis.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Amy, I'd like to say also other of our participants have written that you have a beautiful flute sound.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. So Lino, did my thoughts on awareness in space and reframing, I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Well, yes, that's very helpful. But for me, personally, I tell you, before a major performance, I cannot sleep for 2 weeks, and it's something that is mental. There is always this anxiety, and my question is, will being aware of your body, will that kind of put away that anxiety of performance?
So for me, and this is something that I actively work on, I will not say that I'm an expert at it. I'm still actively working on it. So one of the sort of I would say, things that are transferring from the athletic world to the music world and the music world to the athletic world is this idea of imagining yourself performing. And if you imagine your performance and you can pinpoint the moment in your imagined performance where the anxiety and the nervousness kicks in and why, and how your body feels at that moment, just imagining that you're performing, not that you're actually doing it. But if you can solve that in your mind's eye and flip that to, here's how I want my body to feel, here's how I want that phrase to feel, here's what I want to express in that moment, and then start imagining, oh, this is the emotional content that I want to express. This is how I want my body to feel when I'm expressing that emotional content. Then you can hopefully get through that in your mind and then more easily get through that in performance. And I can offer an example of this. There's a passage in Marty's concerto that's incredibly difficult. And for the longest time, I had the idea like, oh crap, here comes that passage I always screw up. And then I changed my internal dialogue to here is where the rhythm in the passage changes to create a little more tension and excitement in the music. And it was more about the emotion of the rhythmical integrity that overrode the like, oh crap, here's that spot. So when I go for the thought that this rhythm is creating excitement, it's in tension with what the orchestra is doing, and it's building to a resolution. And I was thinking how I wanted to feel to create that energy, I more reliably nail the passage now.
Yeah, I tell you, it's always like that, you know, in every piece, here it comes, and you know, your body starts to tense up like this, and like,
And
oh
that's
my
where
goodness,
you
let me
have
get
to,
through this, please, let me get through this.
so here's one of my best strategies. So I coach with Burton Kaplan, who's written a book called Practicing for Artistic Success. And he has a strategy that he uses when a performance is coming up called the technique of the first try. Because you set an appointment with yourself, you put the clothes on that you're going to perform in, you set up the video camera, you come out, you bow for the video camera, you sit down and you perform. And then you watch the video back. And you watch the video in two different ways. You watch the video from the perspective of you, the performer, and what you want to change about what you're doing and what you want to improve about what you're doing and how you're going to do that and how you're going to change your practice to do that. But then I also like to say you're going to watch it once as if your grandma is watching it or someone who loves you is watching it. And see if you're getting the overriding sense of the music from your performance. But if I start doing that well before I know I have a performance date coming up, actually watching myself on video and seeing what I'm doing physically before those passages come, then I can actually make changes to what I'm doing physically so that I can respond more musically to the passage that's coming up. And it really, I mean, it's a tall order to watch yourself on videotape day after day after day. And I would say it is the thing that I do that reduces anxiety more than anything, because I've seen myself repeatedly. I've given myself feedback repeatedly. And then when I get to the actual performance, there's not a lot that a critic could tell me that I wouldn't already know for myself. So that's a technique that you can do for yourself, but we always have to replicate situations that put us in that heightened state of energy or that revved up state of performance. And that just doesn't happen in the practice room. The practice room, everything is glorious. Well, everything is more glorious. So it's just creating situations. I have, calling up a colleague and saying, hey, let me perform this for you and let's video it and let's watch it together. So you create a more energetic, I notice I'm preferring to call it energetic rather than anxious.
And if I may just say, and that's why we have here at school and in every music school, this is a class called the master class. And it seems like, what I find is that students don't really think so much about it because we're just performing among ourselves. But I want to emphasize to my students that it is so important because once somebody is observing you perform, all of a sudden the energy changes. It's always perfect in the practice room, but only one person listening to you perform changes the whole dynamics, the synergy, the way you think about yourself and the way you think about the music.
And I would say the recorder changes that dynamic as well. Because if you know you're recording it and that you have to listen back, it ramps up, not as much as humans do, but it definitely ramps up that energy. Yeah.
I mean, so can you tell us a little bit about Alexander technique and what exactly that means?
So Alexander technique, it's a method that's studied by a lot of actors, dancers, and musicians, but more so in the general public as well. And it's a technique that I think promotes awareness and how we can, we actually have choices in how we move, that we can use our skulls to lead our spines and our limbs into motion, and that we have movement choices. And so the Alexander technique works with people on sitting, standing, walking, but also in activity. And the technique is really about, becoming aware of your movement habits and where the rubber meets the road in terms of how you move. And for me, body mapping and Alexander technique are very well related because the body map is your mental representation in how you move, like how you think of weight delivery and weight distribution throughout your body. And, if you're including collarbones and shoulder blades in the movement of your arm structure, and if you're noticing the relationship between your hip joints, knee joints, and ankle joints, and your arm structure, and how your spine is supporting all of it. So the two, I find that, for me, what I called this was coming alive through music and movement. The Alexander technique and the body mapping are all about the movement piece, but also the awareness piece and how you're thinking about movement. And then the scores that we play and the creating and practicing, we have to move to play. We can't play without moving. And we musicians are often called the athletes of the tiny muscles because we spend hours and hours and hours in practice rooms learning to play music. And for me, I'm a huge advocate of saying, hey, you have to understand how your body is moving to create the music. You have to understand what habits all the different instruments can cause in your body, and then what you may need to do to, mitigate probably the more injuring parts of spending hours and hours practicing. So the thing I would like to leave people with is that, we aren't just like, as a flute player, I'm not just my lips and my hands, it's my whole body supporting the playing of the instrument. And with the pianist, it's not just, your hands and your arms on the keyboard, but it's your feet on the floor and your pelvis on the piano bench and the support of your spine, so that you've got the floor and the bench and your legs and your pelvis and your spine supporting what your arms are doing. So to me, it's a mind-body method. Both of them I consider to be somatic mind-body methods that help us make better movement choices so that we can fulfill our musical intentions more freely and easily.
Okay.
I'm just going to say one more thing. It is really very important, this aspect, because as we know, even professional, famous concert pianists, concert artists have developed injuries that really kind of stopped or ruined their careers, because the movements in their bodies and the tension ruined the muscles and everything. And so this is actually so important for everybody to know.
Okay, so if I may mention that we had a few weeks ago a public relations and communications specialist from Paris, Diane Gaillard, and she was telling us, Amy, just like you were talking about, similarly to what you're saying about yoga, she's saying how important it is to discover your own body, your own space. And she mentioned how important it is that when you are starting to get agitated, like you say, that you concentrate on your breathing. So at this point, because I understand that you work as also a breathing professional, not only with your flute, but you also teach it, I'd like to start a survey, a poll entitled, I Pay Attention to Breathing. Question is, have you ever gone to a professional for help breathing? And we have two answers, yes or no. You have 5 seconds. 2 seconds.
Simeon, I can't seem to vote.
I'm sorry, I can't help you, Lino. I can't help you with that. And our time is up. So there we have 50% yes and 50% no. Fantastic. So Amy, tell us about this breathing and what this means.
So I have decidedly gone to someone. So I spent about 3 years studying with an Alexander Technique teacher who had worked with Carl Stow, who was a choral conductor who basically learned that people were developing emphysema because they didn't let their ribs move. And he ended up going on to coach the Olympic team before they played in the Mexico City, before they competed in the Mexico City Olympics. And through the work that I did with 3 different teachers who had worked with Carl Stow, I learned about the importance of the movement of your ribs and how, the ribs joint with your spine in the back, and there's cartilage in the front. We can bring Rex a little closer here. So cartilage, this is cartilage that's really, really mobile in the front. AirPod drop again. And then, the joints that the ribs make with your spine in the back. And so for a lot of people that they think they need to hold their ribs still and they don't let their ribs move. And when you actually think of your ribs moving both front and back, then the movement of breath becomes a lot easier.
And Amy, can you tell us, are there any exercises that we can do at home in order to do that?
So a couple of them. One, you can get a bed pillow and put it under your chest and let your feet hang off the bed and turn your head to the side and just breathe and feel the movement of your ribs and back. Another thing that I like to do is to drape over, you can kneel down and drape over a physio ball and get the movement of your back. And then probably the easiest that we can all do right now, I'm going to bring a chair over. And you can just go into like baseball player dugout mode, where you're hinging forward at your hip joints. And just take a few inhalations and exhalations through your nose if you can. And see if you can notice the mobility of your ribs and your back. But you do need to, I think, lean forward, put your elbows on your thighs, and just invite breath into your ribs.
So Amy, I do a lot of things wrong the first time, but I feel that my stomach is pushing out. Is that what I should be feeling? How do I know if I'm doing it wrong?
When you inhale, so when you're doing this and your stomach pushes out, yeah, your stomach will push out, because when you breathe, when your ribs move up and out, your ribs move up and out, and your diaphragm ends up pushing against your stomach, intestines, all of the viscera down here. So if you're bent over and you permit mobility in your ribs, your tummy is going to come out.
Okay. And so that's one. We have a pillow. We're putting our legs
Drape over
the
a
edge of the bed.
pillow, drape over the edge of the bed, and just look for mobility in your ribs.
Okay. And maybe one other exercise.
For breathing
You tell me.
or anything.
Anything.
So yeah, draping over a pillow, draping over a physio ball, just hinging forward in a chair and breathing. Lino, with pianists, I often have them lean forward and give the piano a hug and breathe. And it gives them a sense of the length of their arm structure and the length of the piano, and invites mobility into the ribs. Another thing that can help some rib mobility is to actually sort of find the bottom of your shoulder blade and just see how squishy you can get in up under your arm. And then have your hand under your arm and see if you can inhale and feel your ribs move into your hand.
And Amy, the general feeling when we do this and we feel our ribs moving, it should be a peaceful, it should be a relaxed feeling.
It
How
should
do we
be
know
pleasing.
if we do it wrong, then how do we know that?
It's it's just an exploration, and I'm not going to say it's right or wrong. You're going to notice what you're looking for is the invitation of movement to your ribs. And your ribs are all the way, the top rib comes above your collarbone, and as does your second rib, and that you want your collarbones and your shoulder blades to not be gripping, but you want to allow some ease with your collarbones and your shoulder blades so that you can therefore allow your ribs to find movement.
Okay.
I'm going to make a blatant plug for my breathing book, Simeon. So I've written a breathing book for flute where I talk actually about a lot of these things that we just did. It's written for flute players, but it will, I think, help anyone breathe more freely and easily.
And Amy, the title is the breathing book, or
Breathing book for flute. I can put a link.
breathing
To
book
it
for
and-
flute. Okay, that would be great. Oh, I see it here. Okay. Yeah, fantastic. Then I will show this to everybody. There it is. The
Yep.
breathing book for flute. It's very recent. There it is.
And I will also add, it is now available on iBooks, so you can buy a digital version of it through Mountain Peak Music, the publisher of it.
Fantastic. Wonderful.
I'll
So,
pop that one in the chat.
so Amy, we're just about out of time. I'd like to ask you, so what, as I understand it, this body mapping, the Alexander technique, your journey in general, it has been to discover that everything moves, everything is alive, you know, that it's, that those challenges, you know, that we face in performance or when riding a pony or fundraising, it's really about, you know, discovering it and putting ourselves in that new atmosphere and getting
Mhm.
acquainted. So tell us
Right.
maybe, what would you hope for all of us in the future?
Well, you know, two things: that whole body integration governs everything. So consistently renewing how your whole body is functioning. One of the things that my Alexander technique teacher, Barbara Conable, said was, you know, everybody should put their body through a range of motion every day, which is why, you know, why people tend to love going to yoga or love going to exercise classes, is it does put your body through a range of motion. And so that just means getting your joints moving and figuring out the integration of all of the parts of your body into a whole self. And just using awareness. For me, being forced to teach online and interact with people online, I'm continually like, okay, Lino's in Moraga. Simeon, I think you're in New Hampshire right now. I'm in San Miguel. And so for me, I love thinking about global spaces and just how we're all in this together, and that we all, you know, mostly I think want the same things. So, you know, it's just, you know, awareness is important, and how we respond to things and how we react to things, and just taking a moment to find our breath and find our awareness and the integration of the whole self. I think it allows us to respond and be ready for just about anything.
Inspiring. Thank you so much, Amy.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Lino. Thank you all for coming. It's been my pleasure to be with you.
So Amy, here's your website. It's amylikar.com. I'll put it in the chat room in a second. And there is the Rokeach concerto we listened to with such pleasure, and the breathing book, and about all of your many, many, many activities. So if we want to reach out to you, I just go to contact. Is that right?
Yeah, just
Fantastic.
go to contact.
And then we have info@amylikar.com. So it's okay if our participants reach out to you and ask you
Sure.
questions and
Of course.
tell you about their locations around the globe?
Of course.
Fantastic. So there, I have put that there. Once again, thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you. Thank you
So-
for having me.
Let's take a look at next Wednesday. We have Dolora Sajic, a mezzo in a class by herself. We often hear about sopranos as being the prima donnas of the opera house, but some of the most celebrated, challenging, and complex roles in the repertoire are reserved for the mezzo soprano. Just think of Azucena in Verdi's Il Trovatore. Dolora Sajic's storied career seems to make the point that mezzos don't play second fiddle to any soprano, be it on or off stage. Take, for example, her innovative work at the Institute for Young Dramatic Voices, which she founded to provide current and future generations of unusually enlarged voiced singers the unique support they need to flourish. Come welcome Delora to our show and hear for yourself how Azucena carries the finale. A programming note to our participants in the United States: because of daylight savings time, this show will exceptionally take place from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Pacific Time. As always, all information about upcoming shows can be found at www.simeonmorrow.com. Again, thank you so much to Dr. Amy Likar. Thanks very much to Dr. Lino Rivera. And thank you to Agnieszka Rivole for her support of the shows. Most of all, thanks to you, our participants, who make it all worthwhile. From New London, New Hampshire, from San Miguel de Allende, Mexico, and from the Bay Area, California, goodbye. See you next Wednesday.